Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Greek mythology. Jason and the Argonauts have landed on the island in their quest for the Golden Fleece, and so they are getting closer. So, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into this. He came at once and bade them welcome. His servants hastened to make all ready, build fires and heat water for the baths and prepare food. Into this busy scene stole the Princess Medea, curious to see the visitors. As her eyes fell upon Jason, Cupid swiftly drew his bow and shot a shaft deep into the maiden's heart. It burned there like a flame, and her soul melted with sweet pain, and her face went snow white, now red. Amazed and abashed, she stole back to her chamber. Only after the heroes had bathed and refreshed themselves with meat and drink could King Aedes ask them who they were and why they had came. It was accounted great courtesy to put any answer to a guest before his wants had been satisfied. Jason answered that they were all men of noblest birth, sons or grandsons of the gods, who had sailed from Greece in the hope that they would give them the golden fleece in return for whatever service he would ask of them. They would conquer his enemies for him, or do anything he wished. A great anger filled King Aedes' heart as he listened. He did not like foreigners any more than the Greeks did. He wanted them to keep away from his country, and he said to himself, "If these strangers had not eaten at my table, I would kill them." In silence, he pondered what he should do, and a plan came to him. He told Jason that he bore no grudge against brave men, and that if they proved themselves such as would give the fleece to them. And the trial of your courage, he said, shall be only what I myself have done. And this was to yoke two bulls he had, whose feet were of bronze and breath of flaming fire, and with them to plow a field. Then the teeth of a dragon must be cast into the furrows, like seed corn, which would spring up at once into a crop of armed men. These must be cut down as they are advanced to attack. A fearful harvesting. I have done all this myself, he said, and I will give the fleece to no man less brave than I. For a time, Jason sat speechless. The contest seemed impossible beyond the strength of anyone. Finally he answered, "I will make the trial, monstrous though it is, even if it is my doom to die." With that he rose up and led his comrades back to the ship for the night, but Medea's thoughts followed after him. All through the night long, when he had left the place, she seemed to see him, his beauty and his grace, and to hear the words he had uttered. Her heart was tormented with fear for him. She guessed that what her father was planning. Returned to the ship, the heroes held a council, and one and another urged Jason to let them take the trial upon himself. But in vain. Jason would yield to none of them. As they talked there came to them one of the king's grandsons, whose life Jason once had saved, and he told them of Medea's magic power. There was nothing she could not do, he said. Check the stars, even and the moon. If she were persuaded to help, she could make Jason able to conquer the bulls and the dragon teeth men. It seemed the only plan that offered any hope, and they urged the prince to go back and try to win Medea over, not knowing that the god of love had already done that. She sat alone in her room, weeping and telling herself she was shamed forever because she feared so much for a stranger that she wanted to yield to a mad passion and go against her father. Far better die, she said. She took in her hand a casket which held herbs for killing. But as she sat there with it, she thought of life and the delightful things that are in the world, and the sun seemed sweeter than ever before. She put the casket away, and no longer wavering, she determined to use her power for the man she loved. She had a magic ointment which would make him who rubbed it on his body safe for that day. He could not be harmed by anything. The planet was made from sprang up first when Prometheus's blood dripped down upon the earth. She put it in her bosom and went to find her nephew, the prince whom Jason had helped. She met him as he was looking for her to beg her to do just what she had already decided on. She agreed at once to all he said and sent him to the ship to tell Jason to meet her without delay in a certain place. As soon as he heard the message, Jason started, and as he went, Hera shed radiant grace upon him, so that all who saw him marveled at him. When he reached Medea, it seemed to her as if her heart left her to go to him. A dark mist clouded her eyes, and she had no strength to move. The two stood face to face without a word, as lofty pine trees when the wind is still. Then again, when the wind stirs, they murmur. So they too also, stirred by the breath of love, were fated to tell out all their tale to each other. He spoke first and implored her to be kind to him. He could not but have hope, he said, because her loveliness must surely mean that she excelled in great courtesy. She did not know how to speak to him. She wanted to pour out all she felt at once. Silently, she drew the box of ointment from her bosom and gave it to him. She would have given her soul to him if he had asked her. And now both were fixing their eyes on the ground, abashed, and again were throwing glances at each other, smiling with love's desire. At last, Medea spoke and told him how to use the charm, and that when it was sprinkled on his weapons, it would make them, as well as himself, invincible for a day. If too many of the dragon-teeth men rushed to attack him, he must throw a stone into their midst, which would make them turn against each other and fight until all were killed. I must go back to the palace now, she said. But when you are once more safe at home, remember Medea, and I will remember you forever. He answered passionately, never by night and never by day will I forget you. If you will come to Greece, you shall be worshipped for what you have done for us, and nothing except death will come between us." They parted, she to the palace to weep over her treachery to her father, he to the ship to send two of his comrades for the dragon's teeth. Meantime, he made trial of the ointment, and at the touch of its terrible, irresistible power entered into him, and the heroes all exulted. Yet, even so, when they reached the field where the king and the Colchians were waiting, and the bulls rushed out from their lair, breathing forth flames of fire, terror overcame them. But Jason withstood the fear. Creatures as a great rock in the sea stands the waves. He forced first one and then the other on its knees and fastened the yoke upon them, all while wondering at his mighty prowess. Over the field he drove them, and pressing the plow down firmly and casting the dragon's teeth into the furrows. By the time the plowing was done, the crop was springing up, men bristling with arms who came rushing to attack him. Jason remembered Medea's word and flung a huge stone into their midst. With that, the warriors turned upon each other and fell beneath their own spears until the furrows run red with blood. So Jason's contest was ended in victory, bitter to King Aedes. The king went back to the palace, planning treachery against the heroes and vowing they should never have the golden fleece. But Hera was working for them. She made Medea, all bewildered with love and misery, determined to fly with Jason. That night she stole out of the house and sped along the dark path to the ship, where they were rejoicing in their good fortune with no thought of evil. She fell on her knees and before them and begged them to take her with them. They must get the fleece at once, she told them, and then make all haste away, or they would be killed. A terrible serpent guarded the fleece, but she would lull it to sleep, and it would do them no harm. She spoke in anguish, but Jason rejoiced and raised her gently and embraced her, and promised her she would be his own wedded wife when once they were back in Greece. Then, taking her on board, they went where she directed and reached the sacred grove where the fleece hung. The guardian serpent was very terrible, but Medea approached it fearlessly, and singing a sweet magical song, she charmed it to sleep. Swiftly Jason lifted the golden wonder from the tree it hung on, and hurrying back they reached the ship as dawn was breaking. The strongest were put to the oars, and they rowed with all their might down the river to the sea. By now what had happened was known to the king, and he sent his son in pursuit, Medea's brother, Apsyrtus. He led the army so great that it seemed impossible for the little band of heroes either to conquer it or to escape, but Medea saved them again, this time by a horrible deed. She killed her brother. Some say she sent him word that she was longing to go back to her home, and that she had the fleece for him if he would meet her that night at a certain spot. He came all unsuspecting, and Jason struck him down, and his dark blood dyed his sister's silvery robe as she shrank away. With its leader dead, the army scattered in disorder, and The way to the sea lay open to the heroes. Others say that Apsyrtus set sail on Argo with Medea, although why he did so is not explained, and that it was the king who pursued them. As his ship gained on them, Medea herself struck her brother down, and cutting him limb from limb, cast the pieces into the sea. The king stopped to gather them, and the Argo was saved. By then the adventures of the Argonauts were almost over. One terrible trial they had while passing between the smooth, sheer rock of Scylla and the whirlpool of Charybdis, where the sea forever spouted and roared, and the furious waves mounting up touched the very sky. But Hera had seen to it the sea nymph should be at hand to guide them and send the ship on to safety. Next came Crete, where they would have landed but for Medea. She told them that Talus lived there, the last man left of the ancient bronze race, a creature made all of bronze except one ankle, where alone he was vulnerable. Even as she spoke, he appeared, terrible to behold, and threatened to crush the ship with rocks if they drew near. They rested on their oars, and Medea, kneeling, prayed to the hounds of Hades to come and destroy him. The dread powers of evil heard her, as the bronze man lifted a pointed crag to hurl it at the Argo. He grazed his ankle, and the blood gushed forth until he sank and died. And the heroes could land and refresh themselves for the voyage still before them. Upon reaching Greece, they disbanded, each hero going to his home. And Jason with Medea took the golden fleece to Peleus. But they found that terrible deeds had been done there. Peleus had forced Jason's father to kill himself, and his mother had died of grief. Jason, bent upon punishing this wickedness, turned to Medea for the help which had never failed him. She brought about the death of Peleus by a cunning trick. To his daughter she said that she knew a secret how to make the old young again, and to prove her words, she cut up before them a ram worn out with many years, and put the pieces into a pot of boiling water. Then she uttered a charm, and in a moment out of the water sprang a lamb and ran frisking away. The maidens were convinced. Medea gave Peleus a potent sleeping draught and called upon his daughters to cut him into bits. With all their longing to make him young again, they could hardly force themselves to do so. But at last the dreadful task was done, and the pieces in the water, and they looked to Medea to speak the magic words that would bring him back to them and to his youth. But she was gone from the palace and from the city, and horrified they realized that they were their father's murderers. Jason was revenged indeed. There is a story too that Medea restored Jason's father to life and made him young again, and that she gave to Jason the secret of perpetual youth. All that she did of evil and of good was done for him alone. And in the end, all the reward she got was that he turned traitor to her. They came to Corinth after Peleus' death. 2 sons were born of them, and all seemed well. Even to Medea in her exile, lonely as exile must always be, but her great love for Jason made the loss of her family and her country seem to her a little thing. And then Jason showed the meanness that was in him. Brilliant hero though he had seemed to be, he engaged himself to marry the daughter of the king of Corinth. It was a splendid marriage, and he thought of ambition only, never of love or of gratitude. In the first amazement at his treachery, and in the passion of her anguish, Medea let fall words which made the king of Corinth fear she would do harm to his daughter. He must have been a singularly unsuspicious man not to have thought of that before, and he sent her word that she and her sons must leave the country at once. That was a doom almost as bad as death. A woman in exile with little hapless children had no protection for herself or them. As she sat brooding over what she should do, and thinking of her wrongs and her wretchedness, wishing for death to end her life, she could no longer bear, sometimes remembering with tears her father and her home, sometimes shuddering at the stain nothing could wash out of her brother's blood, of Peleus's too, conscious above all the wild, passionate devotion that had brought her to this evil and this misery. And she sat thus. Jason appeared before her. She looked at him. She did not speak. He was there beside her, yet she was far away from him, alone with her outraged love and her ruined life. His feelings had nothing in them to make him silent. He told her coldly that he had always known how uncontrolled her spirit was. If it had not been for her foolish, mischievous talk about his bride, she might have stayed uncomfortably in Corinth. However, he had done his best for her. It was entirely through the efforts that she was only to be exiled, not killed. He had had a very hard time indeed to persuade the king, but he had spared no pains. He had come to her now because she was not a man to fail a friend, and he would see that she had plenty of gold and everything necessary for her journey. This was too much. The torrent of Medea's wrongs burst forth. "You come to me," she said, "to me, of all the race of men? Yet it is well you came, for I shall ease the burden of my heart. If I can make your baseness manifest, I saved you. Every man in Greece knows that. The bulls, the dragon men, the serpent warder of the Fleece, I conquered them. I made you victor. I held the light that saved you. Father and home, I left them for a strange country. I overthrew your foes, contrived for Peleus the worst of deaths. How now you forsake me. Where shall I go? Back to my father's house? To Peleus's daughters? I have become for you the enemy of all. Myself, I had no quarrel with them. Oh, I have had in you a loyal husband to be admired of men, and exiled now. Oh God, no one to help. I am alone." His answer was that he had been saved not by her, but by Aphrodite, who had made her fall in love with him, and she owed him a great deal for bringing her to Greece, a civilized country. Also, that he had done very well for her in letting it be known how she had helped the Argonauts, so the people praised her. If only she could have had some common sense, she would have been glad of his marriage, as such a connection would have been profitable for her and the children too. Her exile was her own fault only. Whatever else she lacked, Medea had plenty of intelligence. She wasted no more words upon him except to refuse his gold. She would take nothing, no help from him. Jason flung away angrily from her. Your stubborn pride, he told her. It drives away all those who would be kind, but you will grieve the more for it. From that moment, Medea set herself to be revenged as well as she knew how. By death, oh, by death, shall the conflict of life be decided. Life's little day ended. She determined to kill Jason's bride, and then, but she would not think of what else she saw before her. Her death first, she said. She took from a chest a most lovely robe. This she anointed with deadly drugs, and placing it in a casket, she sent her sons with it to the new bride. They must ask her, she told them, to show that she accepted the gift by wearing it at once. The princess received them graciously and agreed, but no sooner as she put it on than a fearful devouring fire enveloped her. She dropped dead. Her very flesh had melted away. When Medea knew the deed was done, she turned her mind to one still more dreadful. There was no protection for her children, so no help for them anywhere. A slave's life might be theirs, nothing more. I will not let them live for strangers to ill use, she thought. To die by other hands more merciless than mine. No, I who gave them life will give them death. Oh, now no cowardice, no thought how young they are, how dear they are, how when they first were born. Not that. I will forget they are my sons. One moment, one short moment, then forever sorrow. When Jason came full of fury for what she had done to his bride and determined to kill her, the two boys were dead, and Medea, on the roof of the house, was stepping into a chariot drawn by dragons. They carried her away through the air, out of his sight, as he cursed her, never himself, for what had come to pass. So yeah, that is the full story of the quest for the Golden Fleece, Jason and the Argonauts. So even in the end, Jason makes foolish decisions. It's a common theme of foolish decisions being made by mortals. that you often see in many of the Greek tales, no matter how great they are. Think of Orpheus. His wife had died, but he had a chance to save her. But his dread, his worry ended up costing him. So yeah, and in Jason's case, he, managed to capture the fleece and make it back home with all the fellow half gods, demigods, but not thinking of a woman who was crazy about him in Medea. He instead married a woman for political advancement, because that's what he says. It wasn't for thought of love or anything like that. It was political motivations only. But yeah, because of his treatment of Medea, Jason's would-be wife was killed, and Medea, even in her own grief, killed her two sons so they wouldn't be made slaves to anyone. And took off. So yeah. So even though, Jason was this great hero, he suffered his own tragedies. Again, showing this very idea of, even though he's born of one God, his human side very much takes over. The ego and everything. Remember, shoot. I can't remember her name now. She had the box of hope, or the box with all the ills of mankind. The only one she managed to stop from getting out was Hope. I forget her name now. I've heard the tale. We went through the tale. I'll know it later. Can't remember. Anyway, yeah. All the evils she ended up unknowingly unleashing upon the world. Yeah. You could even look at that as having an effect. Because once again, it's showing that humans are bound to be human. They do things that seem to make no sense. But yeah. Anyway, we'll end this episode here. That ends, like I said, Jason and the Argonauts, quest for the Golden Fleece. We're, I'd say, 40% of the way through the book. But yeah. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.